And welcome back to the nicest episode of Raise the Banner podcast, episode number 69. As usual, you hear your three co-hosts, Matt Couture, Ben Dirth, Zach Brewitt, and special guest Andrew Callahan. Andrew, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back in Boston. Normal time, a lot of sleep, caught up, ready for free agency.
Absolutely. Let's jump into it. Speaking of free agency, I was telling Ben, I was like, you and Doug put out a juicy article yesterday that hit the timing well for this. Free agency wise, obviously, Alaric Jackson is now gone. There's a lot of talk about Ronnie Stanley being of interest to the Patriots, and then there's a lot of talk that he seems more likely to end up back in Baltimore. Do you view Stanley as like the clear-cut front guy for them? And if not, if he's gone, who do you see as the next guy up in free agency at that tackle position?
I do, guys. He checks a lot of boxes, not just in terms of he's like a living, breathing person who can play left tackle, which you and I know they have not had a whole lot of those in recent years. But he's a veteran, high character guy. He's taken hard coaching, obviously playing in Baltimore over all of those years. And so for a team that wants to bring back that type of identity under Mike Vrabel, this is not only just a plug and play in terms of performance and on the field, but in the locker room. So I think Baltimore's public posturing, like, hey, we want to bring back our left tackles coming off of basically a career year in the last 4 or 5 seasons, makes a lot of sense. But if the Patriots come and go say, hey, we'll give you a 2-year deal, mostly guaranteed, we could get up to 22, 23. Here you go. You hit free agency still. You're just 33. You can go back to Baltimore, cash in. But in the meantime, play with a great coach or great quarterback. And if that doesn't work out, because there are a lot of good teams out there that are going to want Ronnie Stanley, then I think they probably pivot to Dan Moore Jr. out of Pittsburgh. And if not him, Cam Robinson, who's with the Vikings. And before that, the Jags.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I felt with Jackson's re-signing in LA, he kind of probably left, I think, some money on the table. For if you're a good left tackle and they're not going to tag you, I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice to not at least test the market in free agency, because you never know what people are going to throw the house at a position like that, since it's not really available very often. Do you see them? Have you heard anything about their approach as a whole offensively in free agency in general? Obviously, last year they were pretty selective and they didn't really end up spending that much. They spent a lot in-house. Do you get the sense that they're going to be a lot more aggressive right at the start of free agency, or are we looking at another kind of slow start?
Yeah, it's a good question, Matt. And I don't think they even know the answer because, when Doug and I were at the combine, there was a person from the team that we walked in, talked with, and, I had a question at the end that was kind of a throwaway, but I like asking a lot of guys, whether they're coaches or front office people, like, hey, what's the dumbest thing you hear in media all the time? They were like, if I could correct this, these people never said on radio, TV, podcast, whatever, I'd be much happier. And they said, the suggestion that we can just go sign a guy. Like, it is harder. And even if you're making the top offer, sometimes you're making a competitive offer. They want to trade for Brandon Ayuk a year ago, $30 million a year. Here, go, come here. It doesn't work out. So they are intending to be aggressive. It doesn't mean they're going to have 2 tackles, which is what they want early in free agency. It doesn't mean they're going to get a receiver. Again, we put in our report that they're doubtful Chris Godwin leaves Tampa Bay. But if he does, that's a guy they'll be in on. And then they're looking at playmakers in the defensive back 7, as well as some new bodies up front, because this is going to be a lighter, faster defensive front. So they will be aggressive with top of the market guys, as well as mid-level veterans that we know they're interested in and intend to come with their best offer. So if that doesn't work out, they can pivot to other players and move on quickly.
Yeah.
Nice.
Ben, you up?
Yeah. So you mentioned, we talked about Ronnie Stanley. The other Ravens offensive lineman that catches my eye is Patrick Mekari. So those ones kind of twofold. Like, do you, and Matt and I have talked about him before as a possible target. Is it viable to think that, while tackle is a need, obviously they need other bodies along the offensive line. It was pretty rough last year. How viable is somebody like him? And then, kind of piggybacked on, with Higgins getting the franchise tag today and presumably essentially no longer available. Do you see any other wide receivers, whether it's a free agency or via trade, that would be guys to either keep an eye on or at least a viable, realistic option to attain?
Sure. First of all, Mekari definitely is a target. I think Mass Live had their report, which was excellent on Friday, highlighted specifically Mekari And at the end of our story in the free agency section, I said, hey, another position to watch, which is kind of a sleeper spot, is center. They're not going to be in on some of the top guys like Ryan Kelly, but they will be looking in and around the interior of their line because when you look at the market for who is being paid the most at those spots in guard and center, the money's close to what you're getting at tackle now because teams realize the most valuable pressure is right up the middle, right? The only thing that could ever foil Tom Brady was just that immediate A-gap kind of pressure. So the guys who can stop that, by extension, become super valuable. So Macari's up there. Obviously, he can play a little bit of tackle too, and they love versatility. As far as the receivers, there is a real drop-off, not only just in the market, but in the Patriots' interest in the players that would be considered second tier. Like I can tell you, they're not in an Amari Cooper. Stephon Diggs is not a target for them. So you get down to like the Darius Slaytons of the world, and he's had 700 yards in 4 seasons. Pretty good, really good. If he happened to just play in New England, especially look at the quarterbacks down there, it's almost shocking with the Giants, but doesn't really change your life. So it's guys like him, Josh Palmer with the Chargers, who could get overpaid, and that's where they're going to want things at a certain number. And then otherwise, if they whiff out all there, you're looking at the trade market. And I know Brandon Ayuk has been thrown around. I don't really see that. They've kicked the tires on DK Metcalf, which then, of course, leads to the draft, where Tet McMillan is a name that we threw out. If they do trade back from 4 and they'd like to address all their needs right here, that's someone that he has a lot of fans high up in the front office that they could move back and still get in that range, maybe somewhere in 6 to 10.
Yeah, that makes sense. And over the past couple weeks, it feels like there's been kind of a changing of the guard, from last year to this year in terms of who has final say in roster decisions and things like that. Obviously, the Crafts kind of reign supreme in terms of ultimately having final say. But Elliott Wolf came out in his press conference at the Combine and said that he has final say. Other reports, kind of point to Vrabel having final say. What is the sense that you're getting from the team in terms of who ultimately has decision-making powers within the organization?
Yeah, I'd put it to you like this, Zach. If you were told that you're the boss of some area at work, but then someone told you who is going to be your number 2, your right-hand man, like, do you feel super in charge? Probably not.
I think not, yeah.
Right. So this isn't to say that Elliott Wolf is outright lying. He is the highest ranking member of that personnel department. But if Mike Vrabel doesn't want a player, they're not going to sign him. So if you have that kind of final say in actuality, not just in theory, then Vrabel has the power and Elliott Wolf doesn't, bottom line. Like, it doesn't matter who's putting in the card come draft time. It's who's actually writing the name. And right now that feels like Vrabel. That said, they will collaborate. Mike has a lot of respect for what Elliott has done. And I know everyone in New England thinks Elliott Wolf is a moron and he sucks because he was like 5 months ago. But the guy's been in the league for 20 years, was born into the business. There's a lot of fans, as I wrote last year, current and former GMs who say just give him time. And so we'll see whether or not that proves out. And Ryan Cowden is the number 2 I mentioned. Could supplant him possibly in mid-May when a lot of the front office changing goes on. But when you want to know who's in charge, Mike Vrabel, again, is not going to sign off on any players he doesn't want. Mike Vrabel is running meetings with agents at the Combine for prospects and other players around the league. That's the guy who is the alpha and the omega in New England, almost as much as we saw with Bill Belichick.
Makes sense. Do you think Robin Glazer just resigned a couple of days ago? Do you think that was more so direct result of Vrabel's demands and kind of command of that locker room or of the organization as a whole, or what is the sense you're getting about her resigning?
Yeah, I do. I talked to someone who had said she would throw that out there every once in a while, so no one was ever sure when she was serious. But I think there's an element, Zach, of you got to take personal responsibility, right? Like, she's the one who gained new football power last year to become senior advisor to the head coach with Gerard Mayo, which Gerard had signed off on. Has more sane football operations. And then we all saw the disaster that last season was. So she might have been fired on merit. But when a new guy comes in and one of his closest teammates back in the day, Teddy Bruschi, working for ESPN, the following weekend after Mike Vrabel's hired, says he's going to bring everything in. And there are people in the front office who need to be told, you don't know what you're doing and you need to step aside. And then she parts ways with the organization, however you want to frame it, days later. That to me says that's exactly who Teddy Bruschi was talking about. That's exactly who Mike Vrabel looked at. And as we described in the story, her approach was just to do the opposite of Bill Belichick. I don't care what business you're in. I don't care how long you've been in that business. If your plan is just to do the reverse to somebody else's, you don't really have a plan. And so I think there was certainly a lot of element of her making her own bed. And whether the new coach was here or not, she might have been gone anyway.
Yeah, that seems, reading, your article of the opposite of Bill Belichick, it certainly kind of like caught my eye in terms of just kind of being a little bit shocking. Like, are you saying like if he wanted to hire someone, Glazer was pushing for the opposite type of player, like financially? What do you mean by the opposite?
What the program is about, right? Like when you heard the initial stories that came out after Gerard Mayo was hired, and you got new slogans on the building, and we're going to do it this way, and we're going to be collaborative and empower the players. It was just like Belichick ran the show. He didn't really give a crap about any relationships with players, which is probably not the right way to go in the modern business, but he didn't need to give you a reason. He was the greatest coach of all time, was the greatest coach of all time. And so you just went by his rule. Like, guys, if you could picture, someone in Gillette painting a little star, an asterisk above all these words to say, well, that's our North Star, but then it's above 5 different words in the building. Like, you think Bill would put up with that? No. So she was just doing things to say, it'll be nicer. It'll be softer. It'll be more team. We're not going to keep them in the building as long as work is hard. So that's more of what it was.
Okay. Yeah. It seems like the stronger she grew in power, the more of a disconnected probably came between Belichick and the Crafts. Obviously, things kind of deteriorated over the last 3 or 4 years there. Do you get a sense that she played a factor in all of that between Belichick and the Crafts, or were there like struggles independent of her?
No, I think there was a bit of a strain with Belichick and the Crafts independent of her. And you saw some of this in the reporting right after Bill left, right? And some of it was even just him walking in a hallway. Robert would be coming the opposite way, and he just doesn't say anything or offers a grunt. And Jonathan and his relationship, was the worst kept secret in and around the organization. Just wasn't very good for a long, long time, even as they're winning Super Bowls. Robin was more of an extension of the Crafts. So what she represented and how she conducted some of her business and some of her suggestions, Bill just didn't want anything to do with. But Bill was still in charge until he goes 29-39 over the last 4 years, punctuated, as you guys know, by a 4-win season where the quarterback collapses and so does the roster. So I think some of this was independent, but Belichick was never, ever, so long as he was here, going to allow her to have the reach and the say and sit in on coaching interviews when they're looking at assistants and offensive coordinators the way that she was when Gerard Mayo was here.
Absolutely. In terms of the running back room, obviously we have Stevenson under contract, which is a 4-year extension that's just starting. Gibson's back. Stevenson's contract is surprisingly more tradable for the first year of a contract. Are you hearing anything in terms of the running back room? Obviously, this is a strong draft. There's some decent options in free agency as well. Do you expect any notable additions on that end?
I don't think so, Matt, but I would look at the draft as maybe a position because of how deep it is. And Elliot Wolf even went on the record about this, saying he sees the draft as deep at D-line, running back, and tight end, that they could add in the 5th, 6th rounds. Like, it's always a good idea. Those guys typically also play special teams, whether you're returning, you're in punt protection or kick coverage. So there's value there beyond just being a 3rd, 4th stringer in offense. But it's funny because Mike Vrabel, again, publicly says to SiriusXM Radio that Ramondre Stevenson, he fumbled, but the guys up front were doing their jobs. And when he's trying to make a guy miss, some unblocked defender who should have been taken care of is, boom, able to punch the ball out. It's not really on him. Now, you can't fumble as much as he did and count on a long career. But the bottom line was, whether it's people we talked to within the team or other people around the league at the combine, they all said, hey, that's a dude. Like, you just got to give him a little bit more room because he's a real player. And I think they intend and are really banking on a bounce back season from him and more of what you got from Antonio Gibson last year, which in my opinion was really underrated.
Yeah. Ben, you want to go
up? Yeah. So, piggybacking off of, we're talking about, draft decisions, who has the final say. Mine's more specific to like where the Pats currently stand. There's been reports on who they like, who they don't like, why not. But my question more surrounded about, now that the combine is over, has your opinion and your sense of what they may do at number 4 changed since the start of the combine? And if it's different now, like, where do you sit now versus where you were a week ago before the combine unfolded? Yeah,
it's a good question. Ben, first, are you a gamer?
Yes and no. It depends on what it is. I'm a lifelong Madden guy. I have an 11 and a 10-year-old. I just bought a Wii for Christmas, so we do the Mario Kart thing. But I mean, I wouldn't say avid, but no. But
I
yes,
mean, the way your mic sounds reminds me of like all the shit I used to hear when I played Madden Online, and I wasn't very good. So I'm just ready for you just to say a string of terrible things at me, just the way that it comes across. But thanks for keeping it nice. So
of
yeah, look,
course.
it's a good question because the combine, in some sentences, is honestly a front for free agency. Like the teams get together, everyone gossips, you have meetings with agents that don't happen, and you get a feel for what the market's going to be in 10 days. On the other side, you have these measurements, and the teams get to interview these players for the first time in person. The interviews actually went up from 15 minutes to 18 this year, so you get a deeper feel into what you're doing. For me personally, I think free agency is going to be really telling about how the Patriots handle the top of the draft, because some in the front office look and go, hey, if we really hit on all of our targets, and these are not like Ronnie Stanley and Chris Godwin and Milton Williams and all these different dudes, it's just 5 starting caliber players, 4 or 5 guys that are positions of need. They can then go, we'll take best player available, and if we want, we can trade back. And they feel like they can control the draft, which to me, Ben specifically says, that opens up a world of possibilities, whether it's receiver, Ted McMillan, Will Campbell, Mason Graham. I've had the joking line that Will Campbell and the tackle talk with the short arms, like the T-Rex still dominated the animal kingdom once upon a time, okay? But for them, I'm not sure. So I'm a little less certain about what they're going to do, but what happens in free agency will tell me whether I go back to, okay, it'll be Will Campbell or Mason Graham, which is what I thought going in, or maybe they truly do go best player available, trade back, and maybe it's someone like Tyler Warren.
Awesome.
Oh boy, don't get me too excited with Tyler Warren.
And I mean, you brought it up, so I'll just ask. So Burt Breer was on 98.5 this morning, talking about his impressions from the draft, and the question I happened to hear was they were specifically asking him, what is the stigma with Will Campbell and and his arm measurement, and Breer went into that, it's definitely not a non-issue, but that he's certainly athletic enough that maybe he can overcome that. And he comped him to a guy like, loosely, he comped him to a guy like Rashawn Slater, who has shorter arms for a guy his size, but he's athletic enough to overcome it. How much do you read into the arm length thing for a tackle, like in a vacuum, but then specific to Will Campbell, who is a very athletic guy, considering he's 6'6", 320, he ran a sub 540. Like, do you think he's athletic enough to overcome it? Or do you think that there's enough reservation there that, yeah, he could be really good at guard, but do you really want to spend the number 4 pick on a left guard?
Right. And we know 3 years ago, the Patriots spent that first round pick on a guard, and we all know how that went. But look, I think you're going to get different answers on this, Ben, up until draft day. Like, there's some guys that just go, he's way too short. You can see where the short arms affect him when he does get beat, not even just for sacks, which he only gave up 2 in 38 starts, great numbers, but in terms of pressure. And so teams will look to capitalize on that in the same way. The question is, can he overcompensate, as you said with Slater? I would love to credit who tweeted this, but it escapes me right now. Someone said he would have the shortest wingspan of any tackle coming out of the draft since 2011 if he sticks to that position.
They were talking to that on 98.5 today.
Beautiful. So that finally has me hesitating and stopping with the T-Rex line that I used earlier, because look, what you have to then be is not just someone who's got good skill sets everywhere except for your arm length. You have to be elite at all of those different things, whether it's your footwork, your punch, your core strength, your angles, your technique. And so in a way that like Drew Brees was elite with his arm, his accuracy, his processing to overcome the fact that he's shorter than I am. And it worked out for Drew Brees. I don't know if Will Campbell's in that kind of tier. I'm not talking about future Hall of Famer first ballot, but just, can you overcome that deficiency physically that you can never do anything about? And that to me is a good question, because this now is not just, oh, he's got shorter arms. This is like outlier type of shorter arms. So I'm going to talk to some more people, watch a little bit more myself. I'd been convinced up until a day or two ago, but we'll see.
Yeah, the wingspan thing certainly caught me off guard, because I was following Daniel Jeremiah on X, because he was posting all the measurements, and I was stunned because he put Kelvin Banks next to Will Campbell on the measurement list, and they're comparable size-wise. Campbell's a little bit bigger. But the thing that stood out to me is that despite the fact that Campbell is about 1.5 inches shorter than Will Campbell, his wingspan is 7 inches longer, which to me was staggering.
Zolak was saying online today, on 98.5 today, he thinks it's his shoulders. His shoulders, like, some people have broad, wide shoulders. Yeah. Campbell has, like, for someone who's as big as he is, his shoulders are narrow and small. So it probably takes away really from how much his reach is in terms of when they're measuring, obviously, arm length and wingspan. And so, like you said, Andrew, it kind of puts you put the nail in the coffin right there of, I think it might be what drives him down the board outside the top 10. Because I think if you're taking a tackle inside the top 10, you better hit on the pick anyways because it's a top 10 pick. But if you draft a tackle and he ends up having to be a guard, we saw Patriots fans lose their mind over a late first round pick guard. Never mind if they miss on a top 4 pick, player like that.
Yeah, and I think the teams are learning too, guys. Like when we all want to know here March 3rd, what are the Patriots going to do it for? They don't know. How am I supposed to know, right? Like Sean Payton was on the record with the NFL saying we didn't know about Bo Nix as being our guy. Like that continued to come through the analytics and the pro days and the interviews. And look, there's a lot of the scouting report. Like the ink is just dry. Scouts who watch them all throughout the season and watch them play, they feel a certain way. But it's the details that make the difference in the divide and the opinions from team to team, media person to media person. And that's ultimately what drives and determines the draft pick. So, again, I think if you look at Will Campbell and say, as I have for most of the season, don't overthink it. He's plug and play. Like he's in the SEC, giving up 2 sacks in 38 starts, dominating. And before you even heard this year, and then we're like, oh, we measured his shoulders. They're a little bit smaller. Well, that gives you less area to punch at, right, as a defender. And if you're not top heavy, then you're more balanced. And he's a guy who's got great core strength. So it's just a matter of, does all of that outweigh the potentially recent history of tackles all having a wider wingspan? I don't know the answer, and I don't know if teams do, but I know I'll be asking around to find out and have a better feeling.
Andrew, just tell us who they're going to take. Like,
and I wish I could tell you. Like again, like you pick a player, Matt, and I'll sign off right now. How about that?
All right. Speaking of that, Travis Hunter, multiple. I think it was Ben. Was it Barth that made the comment that they don't like him? And then there was another conversation that they felt like he was the best wide receiver and the best cornerback in this draft. Have you heard anything specifically on him with the Patriots? Obviously, they made the comments about wanting to build through the trenches, and he is not that. Do you see the interest there between the two of them, or do you think it's something that they avoid because he's not, on the line of scrimmage?
Yeah, I think there is interest there. I mean, he's a true generational college player, right? Like guys who've just never done that before, especially at that high of a level, wins a Heisman Trophy. I think they are high on him, but they also look and go, if they get, as we wrote in the Herald, Charvarius Ward, great outside corner, and they're going to revamp their nickel position as well. We don't really want to add there. So then it's okay. Do we see him at receiver? But if there are teams that are more willing than we are to play him both ways, theoretically, let's say they're not, well, we could go back from 4 and, again, still get a player that's really good and add more draft capital at the same time. So I think they really like him, maybe even love him from what I've heard. But the question is always how much and at what expense. Because if he does fall, that probably means Shedeur Sanders went in the top 3, which to me, I can't see right now based on what I heard, based on everything else that's gone on at the Combine. But if he does, it's still not a point where I think they just run to hand the card in. Because they know they'll get calls. There are teams that might love him more, and then it's okay. Give us your best offer. Can we get an extra second or a future first? And then I think you'd probably have to take it. If not, just think about it.
Yeah, there's a QB tax and trade downs in the top of that draft, but it seems like Hunter is pretty close to. If you're not going to be a quarterback, he's as much of a prized possession as you can get for a non-QB in the top 5.
Right. And even if, let's say, Vegas called from 6 and you're at 4, you look at the modern trade value chart, shout out Rich Hill, Pat's Pulpit, that's a 3rd round pick to jump up that. Like, I don't know what you guys think, but for a team that sucks like the Raiders have, that's your 5th top 80 pick that you would have just to go back 2 spots. And when they're going to take a guy, if you have 2 players that you like at 4 and you go back to 6 and one of them isn't the guy that they're coming up for, you're going to get one of your 2 picks that you want, and you just add a 3rd for nothing. So that's kind of the situations they're going to be mapping out coming up.
Yep.
Yeah, and sticking on the Combine, and obviously Hughes coming back from the Combine is kind of fresh in your mind, I would assume. Was there anyone who kind of stood out that you maybe added to your list of like most likely players that the Patriots would draft or just kind of fit what the Patriots looking for?
Yeah, it's interesting, guys, because we know the prototypes have changed on defense. So for me, I'm catching up a lot on even hearing, Jamie and Sherwood, 216-pound linebacker. Like Bill Belichick would have just passed immediately on that guy, as good as he was for the Jets the last few years. But that's a guy that's now high up on their board in free agency. So I'm still adjusting to the prototypes on defense. What I will say, though, is the guys who have my eye are receivers at the end of the first round, because we know the Patriots tried to get back into the end of the first round last year and trade up. Didn't work. There are players like Matthew Golden, who had a great combine. Maybe he doesn't make it to 25 and 26. Luther Burden out of Missouri. Okay, those are players that I think the Patriots might go, if we didn't get Ted McMillan, we still traded back, we're in a good spot. We take that extra third we got. We'll go 4 to 6 or 4 to 7 or 4 to 8 or whatever. Then we move back up from the start of the second round. We can still get a first-round receiver. So those are the guys, especially the ones that perform well, that I have my eye on for them to go get. Egbuka at Ohio State is still in that mix, and I think really could be a way for them to get 2 first-round prospects without having to give up the farm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Ben, you want to take the last one?
Yeah, so defensive side of the ball. Would you say that you see any additional notable, subtractions from the roster? Obviously there's a few guys that are free agents, and they certainly have some needs. So the guy that comes to mind is John Jones. Certainly fills a solid role on this defense. I'd love to have him back. I certainly wouldn't overpay for him. If somebody's gonna, go a little bit above market value to draw him away, I wouldn't necessarily say I would outbid them for that. But who would you say would be, the biggest loss on defense? And then the flip side of that, who's a top of the Christmas list free agent defensive player in your opinion that kind of fills, well, I guess it doesn't have to be a free agent. I guess you could trade, somebody like a Harold Landry supposedly is on the block. But yeah, subtraction from the roster that we might lose in free agency, and then, a guy that they could certainly add in that kind of tops your list of desires.
Yeah, so Milton Williams has a big bow on his head, and he's been under that tree for weeks. That's the guy that they want. Then he fits, we talk about the new prototypes for the Patriots defense up front, penetrating defensive tackle, good pass rusher, had 1.5 or some odd number of sacks in the Super Bowl. That's a guy they want. That's the guy that they're going to try to go get. And I would agree, given he's, entering his prime here, comes from a good organization. You're getting him in a good spot in his career. He's going to command a lot of money. But if Christian Barmore can come back, man, you kind of set it and forget it with those two in the inside that are going to command a lot of attention. As far as the free agents that they could lose, Jonathan Jones is at the top of the list. He does want to return. They want him back. When a guy wants to come back, you have your offer, that the maximum you would go, then offer a lot lower and lowball him. So now it's a question of, okay, will he take our minimal offer or not? And then that's the whole negotiation that plays out. He has prepared to play elsewhere. To me, he wouldn't be your nickel or your outside corner next season. He would be like a utility guy, right? All due respect to our guy Lou Merlone with 20
Could you see him at free safety at all?
Yeah, he played safety in their last Super Bowl. He's got the speed to play free safety in a single high. So that's why I talk about everywhere else. But there's another name in that secondary, Marcus Jones, and we had heard this, didn't include it in the story. So I got to give credit to Brian Hines from Pat Pulpit, who I know put this in his notes, I think today or yesterday, that they might move on from him. Because, again, the defensive prototypes that change are not just up front. And that's a guy who could be on the way out, whether it's now, a couple of months, or even training camp. Because I think they're going to look at that nickelback position and say, we can do better. Even if we bring John Jones back, we'll just be kind of a backup everywhere.
Yeah, that was going to be actually kind of my next question is, I heard there's some whispers here and around that we could see some shakeups of existing defensive guys. Outside of Marcus Jones, I guess, is there anybody else that you see that they could move on from that has been a core player for them in the last couple of years?
No, I don't think so, Matt. And I got to run here soon. But I'll tell you this, the fact they're going after Jamie Sherwood, he's 30 pounds lighter than Juwan Bentley. Mm-hmm. He's 40 pounds lighter than Jelani Tavai. So those guys are under contract. Tavai got a recent extension. Bentley's going into a contract year. They're still good players, but they just don't fit the vision for what Mike Vrabel wants. And that's something that, again, is a total departure from the last 24 years of Bill Belichick. These big lumbering linebackers, Vrabel himself, who played off the ball and on the edge. And those guys are not going to be how he rebuilds his defense moving forward.
Awesome. All right. That will do it for you, Andrew. I appreciate you coming on. Obviously, everyone watching, Andrew Callahan with the Boston Herald gave out his juicy article yesterday with a lot of news. Any final words?
No, I appreciate you guys having me on. Ben, be good to the kids on Madden and your kids playing Wii, Mario Kart, very close to my heart. Good talking to you, Zach. Matt, I appreciate the time, guys. All right?
Thanks, Andrew. Take care. Go Pats.
All right. Andrew Callahan, like I said, from the Boston Herald. Appreciate you coming on. That was a good round, boys. After all that, how are we feeling with the Patriots going in the offseason and as a whole? Obviously, free agency is it a week from tomorrow?
Today.
A week from today? Okay.
Noon on March 10th. I'll be texting you guys from the Disney Wish cruise ship being like, guys, what do we got?
Christmas morning all over again.
Yeah, exactly. So to answer your question, I'm kind of upside down, if that's a weird way of putting it. The combine and following, all the peripheral stuff certainly kind of altered some viewpoints of mine. Maybe brought some more into some things more into focus. Some things kind of became a little bit less clear. For me, it could be recency bias. A lot of people can't not talk about, the Will Campbell arm thing, which I think is, Breer's correct. It's not a non-issue. I think it's a little overblown. Obviously I'm not an NFL scout, but from what I've seen, he certainly looks athletic enough that I think he could overcome it. But that's all going to come down to, really refined scouting reports, tape, further interviews. I don't know. The offensive linemen usually run another pro day like the skill guys do. I don't know. Probably not. I would say that I'm less convinced now that the Patriots trade out of 4 than I was a week ago. And that's not necessarily because of who I think the Patriots might grab it for, but what's probably going to happen at the top of the draft. I'm probably more confident now than I was a week ago that in some order it's going to be Carter, Hunter, and Cam Ward as your top 3 picks. I just think that, from what you heard out of the combine around Shedeur Sanders, I don't know as if he's going to do enough during a pro day to make them go, maybe we were wrong about his interview. Special guest, the cheese master himself, Cheddar. I don't know if he would do enough from a physicality and talent standpoint to make GMs and scouts question whether they missed something during the interview process during the combine. So those 3 guys that's who I expect to go in the top 3. Especially where Abdul Carter doesn't need ankle surgery. I think that was huge for him. And even still, I don't know as if teams would balk at the idea of still taking him in the top 3. I think he's just that freakishly good. Kudos to Matt. Shout out to Matt for picking this up a month ago. I told him he was absolutely off his rocker, that Abdul Carter would be a top 5 pick, and I'm like, a target for the Pats. And I told him he was dead wrong and crazy. But so kudos to you. I'll admit when I'm wrong. I would love Abdul Carter at number 4. He's probably the guy they take if somehow he doesn't go in the top 3. But I just don't think they trade back unless somebody calls, if somebody unexpectedly falls, like a Travis Hunter or an Abdul Carter is not taken in the top 3 and they just get blown away by an offer. That to me, I think is really the only way they trade back. I think you're looking at a team that, depending on what they do in free agency.
Who do they take?
I mean,
if Hunter and Carter are gone.
I mean, to steal a page out of Andrew Callahan's book, I can't really tell you, just because free agency will dictate it. However, gun to my head, I would say Mason Graham's at the top of my draft board. Unless they add a legitimate stud guy up the middle. Mason Graham, again, shout out Matt for this little factoid, is one of only 3. No, how do I want to word this? So since 2016, only 2 interior defensive linemen had a higher run stop rate and pass rush win rate than he did coming out of college.
Both.
Correct, both, not one or the other. They were better than him in both categories. Quinnen Williams and who was the other one?
Jalen Carter.
That's right, Jalen Carter. So I think
about those 2 names.
Pretty good players,
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I know that they want to build in the trenches. If for some reason they can't land a guy up the middle, like a Milton Williams, I'm sorry, then I could see Mason Graham being a guy they salivate over. The one knock on him was his weight when he weighed in at the combine. I don't think it's much of an issue. I think that Michigan probably overlisted his weight. Something tells me that a professional athlete going into the biggest tryout, potential professional athlete going into the biggest tryout of his entire football career is not going to cut 25 pounds of weight ahead of the biggest tryout of his life.
Well, especially when you're an interior defensive
right.
line.
If you're an edge guy, different story, right? You obviously you want to be faster than the guy across the line from you, but when you're up the middle, you're trying to throw a guy back into the face of the quarterback, and you're not doing that if you're cutting from 320 down to 295. So I think that he probably was listed at a much higher weight, not much higher, but maybe 10, 15 pounds higher at Michigan than what his actual weight was. But I'm probably 70-75% confident that they're going to stay at 4 and take a guy they think is the best player available. It's probably Mason Graham or Abdul Carter if he's still there. I think if Travis Hunter's there, that's probably where you trade.
You muted yourself.
You went on mute, yeah, somehow.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure how that happened, but yeah. So if Hunter falls, I can see somebody moving up for him. Otherwise, I would expect him to stick. And if they really love Will Campbell and they think he's athletic enough, I think it's either Campbell or Graham, or Carter if he falls.
Yeah. I think for me, to answer your question of like how I'm feeling going into the offseason, I'm always excited when it comes to like opening a free agency, especially the draft. For as negative as I am towards the Red Sox offseason over the past couple of years, I am equally as high on the Patriots, even though they really haven't done a whole much more than the Red Sox, so to speak. I'm just always much more optimistic about it. That being said, I think there's a lot of holes that this team has. Not as many players to be filled. But they have the money. They have the cap space to go out and overspend for whoever they want, whether that is a Milton Williams, whether that is, T. Higgins isn't available, but let's say Chris Godwin, makes it to free agency, someone like him, and others as well. And then of course the draft. I think I'm with Ben that they won't trade out of number 4, just given how much entertainment, I guess, or how much teams in the top 3 are entertaining trades. You hear about, the Jets wanting to move up, talking to Tennessee about moving up to number 1, Cleveland obviously needing a quarterback, and then Raiders wanting to move up as well. I think they're going to have their pick of Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter if they want, and of course Mason Graham as well. Given Vrabel's comments, I do think they're probably going to take Carter or Mason Graham. Just given the fact that he wants to build the trenches and build it from that way. I don't know that I necessarily buy into the negativity around the arm length of a Will Campbell, so to speak, but that doesn't mean that I don't think that the Patriots look that way. But that being said, overall vibes are relatively high going into the offseason. Like I said, this is probably my favorite part of NFL season outside of obviously Super Bowl week. But yeah, I think you're going to have your pick of those 2 players, Graham and Carter, as well as Hunter. And then you have the ability to go overspend for whoever you want, whether, and I'm feel comfortable that Vrabel will be able to talk to Kraft and talk him into overspending in a way that Bill never did. Bill was always cap conscious. And I don't think Mayo had the pull, nor did he ever put himself out there enough to go against Kraft in that way, where I think Vrabel can. I think Vrabel can speak to, hey, we need this guy, whether it's, like I said, Milton Williams, just to use that name, and talk to Kraft and get him to open up the checkbook. So yeah, I think we're heading into a good spot.
So
yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Well, so Zach, I'll pose the question to you. If you're sitting there at 4, what would it? So let's say that there's Travis Hunter sitting there at 4. Andrew Callahan mentioned Vegas moving up, and that if you look at the draft pick value chart, that you could essentially move back 2 spots and add a 3rd rounder. I don't know where they are in the 3rd round. I know it's high. I'd have to go look at the actual number. But in your opinion, is that enough that you would trade back 2 spots and risk losing a guy, or would you want more than just their 3rd round pick on top of 6? Like, would you want something more than an early 3rd round pick?
I would want something more than a 3rd round pick, whether that's 2 picks, a day 2 and a day 3, or something next year. But definitely wouldn't love the idea of going just like back from 4 to 6 and then whatever Vegas has in the 3rd round. But to answer your question of like what would it take, they're presumably going to be moving up for a quarterback, which would leave one of Hunter, Graham, and Carter off the board. That leaves 2 players in Jacksonville. Let's say they pick Hunter. That's still, to Callahan's point, is leaving you with one of those players that you have in your top 3, let's say. So I'd be okay with moving back. But again, I think that given the needs of all the players ahead of you, or all the teams ahead of you, excuse me, Tennessee, Cleveland, and the Giants, I just think each one of them needs a quarterback. And even if Tennessee doesn't want a quarterback and the Jets, let's say, move up to number 1, they'll be taking a quarterback. So I think either way, you're going to have your pick of whoever's available, or whoever you want of their top 3. So I don't think they're going to need to move back, I guess is my point.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, so I looked it up while you were giving your take on it. If they were to make that trade hypothetically, it would give them, if they kept it, they'd have back-to-back picks at 68 and 69, which to Andrew Callahan's point, which to Andrew Callahan's point means that say you trade back to 6, Vegas is like, hey, we think that Hunter's a can't miss prospect. What's it going to take for us, to move up, and let's just say they settle on 6 and 68 for 4. That enables you where if you trade that 3rd round pick along with your early 2nd to move up into the latter half of the 1st, if a guy like Golden or Buka, Burden, like whoever you have at the top of your wide receiver board is there, it allows you to
Matthew Golden.
It allows you to move up either from 68 or 69 without changing. Like at the end of the day, you would have moved back 2 spots to 6 and then up in theory anywhere from 12 to 15 spots from 38 without surrendering your 3rd round pick, because you use the additional one to move up to the left.
Well, they also have Atlanta's 3rd as well.
Yeah,
it would take roughly
which is right now it's
so
77.
So 38 and 77 can get you into the mid-20s in the draft.
Yeah, so if they're going by value of picks, then I think that would be something to consider for sure. If you're going by best available player at 4, and let's say 2 of the 3 players that they have on their top list or their top 5 is available, I think, like I said, if you're going for value, I would do the trade. If you're going for best players available and who can make the most impact at 4, I think they stick around, because there's just a lot of depth with this draft class. So
yeah, I would agree. I think, and I forget who said this in their draft analysis, said that there's a lot of meat on the bone in the not the 1st round, but like your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round talents. Wide receiver comes to mind. I was telling Matt this. I think, in my opinion, I think this wide receiver class lacks a true elite, like top guy, like clear cut, like obviously, like in my opinion, and I think a lot of people's opinions except for Matt, I would say most people probably have Tet McMillan as the top wide receiver of the draft class. He is not Matt's number 1 wide receiver. Maybe he'll reveal that sometime in the near future. But that
is not my number 2 either.
No, Matt does not like the big-bodied guys who can do it all and run fast. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, I mean, Tet McMillan.
What do you mean? He's not fast.
For a guy who's 6'4", he's pretty fast. So
I'm not as high on Tet McMillan either as most people are that I've seen on Twitter, but
no, but I would say if you were to ask most NFL scouts, I would say more than 50% would say that Tet McMillan is the top wide receiver of the class. And I mean, your top 5 is going to fluctuate, but given that there is no clear cut number 1, and there's no top end talent either. So you look at the guys that are probably in the, say, 4 to 10 range, the drop from 4 to 10 is probably not that high.
Right.
So you have that. I think you have the similar case with this running back class. I mean, Jonty is the clear cut number 1. I don't think anybody would dispute that. But after him, I think that you could make a legitimate argument for a handful of guys being that next running back, because you've got Quinshon Judkins, you've got Dylan Sampson, Cam Scatterbo, Travion Henderson maybe kind of jumps up into that category. I have Judkins a little higher. Who? What?
Hampton.
Yeah, that's right. Omari and Hampton from UNC. Like, you could make a fair argument for like that second tier of running backs, the same way that you could make the argument about the second tier wide receivers, which kind of feels like that every year, but it just speaks to the fact that while there is no top end talent at those two spots, there's a ton of depth.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, and going back, because I didn't want to forget it, is last offseason, the Patriots finished 9th in cash spent on players, on contracts given that offseason. Now, a good amount of that was obviously our own players. Nevertheless, whether you're re-signing your own players or signing new ones, money spent is money spent. So I'm interested. I mean, that's certainly one thing I'm interested to see this offseason is, like, really, they got the most cap space in the league. Where do they end up in cash spent? Because obviously there's this whole reputation around Kraft and that he's cheap and that he's not going to spend money. And if you go 2 off seasons in a row post Belichick and you're top 10 cash spent, maybe the narrative starts to change a little bit, and they say, maybe it was just Belichick in the way he structured his roster. I've always been a big believer in that concept, because what's the one thing that we know about Belichick? 1, he didn't really give off a lot of bad contracts. 2, he moved on from players a year early, than a year late. And the way that teams generally end up in the top 5 of cash spent over a long period of time is what? It's bad deals, right? Because you're paying people that are not on your team anymore. That's how you end up in the top 5. So if you go back and look, and over the last 10 years, the top 5, top 10 cash spent, there's probably a few good teams, obviously, but there's also probably some dog shit teams or teams that were middling at best, because they're paying out a bunch of shit contracts. In terms of this offseason, at number 4, I mean, Ben, you made the comment, like, all right, like, if Carter's there, that's the only way you could really see them trading back. I kind of feel almost the complete opposite, to be honest with you. I think if Carter or Hunter's there, that they're going to be more intrigued to trade back because the offers might be really good. If they're not there, I still think they look at it and say, like, who do we want? And if there's not a clear-cut answer, they should be trying to move back, even if that value isn't crazy. So if Graham's the best player available, I said this numerous times over the last few days on X, is it takes one team to love a player, right? It takes one team to love Mason Graham. It takes one team to love Will Campbell, whoever it may be. And same thing if Sanders happens to be the guy there. So say if Carter and Hunter go in the top 3, if Sanders is that guy number 3, it takes one team to love him. All it takes is one team, and then you can get pretty good value back. So I think if Carter and Hunter are gone and they're looking at number 3 and they don't truly love, whoever their best available is, and they don't feel like it's worthy to pick, they should be looking to trade down, even if the value just isn't really there. Don't force the pick. And if you look at, just moving back to, like you said, to 6, even if you could just get 1/3, like if that's all you're able to get for a team like the Raiders to move back 2 picks, if you're still getting the guy you want, you also have to consider, what if they have, I don't know, let's just for kicks and giggles, because I love the guy, what if they have Jelon Walker as their 4th best player? Do you take him at 4, or do you slide back to 6, knowing that there's a really good chance that he's going to be there at 6? So I look at that and be like, all right, well, I think.
I mean, it would come down to what likelihood you have of the guy, right? So if you look at the top of the draft, and if you're only sliding back 2 spots, you have to look at who you want and who's available, because, I mean, obviously any team can surprise you, but at least from what I've read, the top option for the Jaguars at 5 has been a guy along the defensive line. I've seen Mason Graham at that spot in a ton of mock drafts because defensive line is a big area of need. They need high-end talent, and he's the next guy that tends to be available at 5. So if you're looking at somebody like a Mason Graham as a guy that like he's at the top of your list, it really depends on, from conversations that you have with guys around the league, is Mason Graham going to last to 6, right? But to your point, if the gap between, let's just say your top 3 picks are Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, and Abdul Carter, and actually, no, let me give you a better example. Let's say it's Cam Ward, Abdul Carter, and then the Giants just say they absolutely fall in love with Shedeur Sanders, forget everything that people kind of are cautious about during his interviews, and they take Shedeur Sanders. They need a quarterback. They love him. They think they can, kind of rein him in, and they want to go for talent. So you're sitting there and you've got Travis Hunter at 4, but let's just say that he's not at the top of your board. It's Mason Graham. But then the gap between Mason Graham and the next guy, who is probably what? You're looking at guys like, in general, Will Johnson, Michael Williams, James Pierce, Jalen Walker. Like, that's probably that next tier of guys. Like, if your gap from Mason Graham to that next tier,
Walker.
If that's like the
I'm
next,
just going to do that throughout the whole draft cycle for my favorite players.
yeah, I'll be sitting on the couch because Matt, I think we got a tradition going. I think you got to come over for the first round.
Yeah, except for you abandoned me for your family last year.
I did 100%. I abandoned you for my.
My daughter's getting an award.
And she did. She got an all. You know what? When your future kids are up for All-American awards, I'll expect you to ditch me for that every time.
I'm just fucking with you.
I know. I can take it. I'm not young and naive, soft-skinned guy.
Screw the children.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Fuck those kids. But if your gap from like the guy at the top of your board, Mason Graham, is not that high, let's say it's Mason Graham and Jalen Walker are your top 2 guys in the draft board, but you're looking at it and you're going, okay, Mason Graham, we grade him at a 94, and Jalen Walker's a 93. Like, I would absolutely trade back and risk that I'm not going to get Mason Graham, but I'm going to get Jalen Walker because to me,
correct.
Like right. But if you look at Jalen Walker and you're like, yeah, the gap's pretty large, I'm not making the deal. But to your point, and to Zach's point, there's so much depth in this draft. And aside from like a handful of guys, like Abdul Carter, right? The gap from Abdul Carter to the next edge guy is probably significant enough that you're not passing on Abdul Carter to be like, well, I know I can't get Abdul Carter, I'll just go get James Pierce. Nothing against James Pierce.
There's a lot of starters, not a lot of stars in this draft.
Correct. Yeah. But again, there's obviously a few exceptions, right? Like, I'm not passing on Abdul Carter for James Pierce. Like, I would take Abdul Carter and not trade back and lose,
Yeah.
But to your guys' point, I think there's enough depth and there's a lack of top end talent that I'd be hard pressed to be upset if they traded back and ended up with, an A- player versus an A player, because there's hardly any A+ players in this draft.
Yeah, I think if both A+ players are gone, then I'm okay like trading back and not like reaching, for example. But if Carter and or Hunter is available, or if that's who if Hunter is who you declare as an A+ player, Abdul Carter is pretty much unanimously an A+ player. If he's available, I'm taking him at 4.
Yeah,
like
I would agree. If he's sitting there at 4,
I'm sorry, Ben, that you paused. Did you sneeze?
I thought I was going to, and then I didn't.
When you came back live, it was like frozen for half a second.
I was probably going. Yeah, awesome.
I was laughing at it. I wasn't ready for you to be gone for a while, and then you just came right back. I wasn't ready for you to respond just yet.
Some people have said I do have a face for radio, but that's a story for another day.
All right, let's finish up with state your takes. I'll start. You know what? I'll start us off. I usually make you guys go first. I'll start us off this time around. And it's it's something that I think Callahan kind of confirmed of their interest and stuff, and that is, I think Milton Williams will be a New England Patriot officially by March 12th.
You think
I think it'll be
4-1, March 12th?
announced really quick. I think they're going to go and they're going to sit there and they're going to give him a 4-year, $88 million deal, somewhere in that range. I think that Barmore, we'll see what happens with Barmore. His future seems a little uncertain, but if we assume that he is coming back, the idea of Barmore and Milton coming up the middle, I personally, I think it just is a complete nightmare for another team. I don't think there's a better 1-2 combo coming up the middle than you would have than Barmore and Milton Williams. Milton Williams is one of, if not the best pass rushing interior defensive lineman in the league. He's not phenomenal against the run. He's okay. But boy, can he get up the middle and get after the pass rusher. So I'll go Patriots at 4 years, $88 million. Milton
I like
Williams
that. I'll stick on the Pats offseason. I was looking it up. 2021, when they had that big splash of just free agents that they signed, I couldn't find if this was all of their
good player.
What?
A good player.
No, I couldn't
free
find a good
agent
player.
splash in 2021.
But I also couldn't find out if the guaranteed money they have in this article is to only guys outside of the organization, or like if they count re-signings too. But the number I have is 137.5. I think they're going to exceed that. I think there's a ton of money.
Total guarantees.
Total guarantees, yeah.
Okay.
Ton of money.
Because I think total spend was like 160 something, 170 ish.
Okay. So
But
if it's 160, there's no way there was 130 guaranteed. 130 might have included re-signings.
But yeah, that's what I'm.
Usually you don't go more than like 45 to 50%, maybe a touch higher for the average player of guarantees.
So let's see. March 27th, 2021, per Mike Reese. Patriots spent $159.6 million in free agency.
Well, there you go.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah,
I mean, Zach, I like it. I think that there's a good chance.
Yeah, I would.
I mean, Milton Williams alone would take up at least like 50 of that.
That's a big chunk of there. I think there's so many needs on this team that like you'd have to be, whiffing on every single player for the most part that you're going after to
don't underestimate them
to not come close. That's true. That's true. Again, I told you I'm for as negative as I am about the Red Sox, I am equally as optimistic for the Pats.
All right, Benny boy, let's hear it.
My state your take is draft related. I did mention it earlier. Assuming the status quo, that the Patriots do what Mike Vrabel says they're going to do. I will say that the Patriots will not trade back from the number 4 pick, and you will end up with some combination of Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, or Will Campbell. Not necessarily in that order, although I think Will Campbell is third on that list. I just think that crazy things happen. I mean, obviously free agency is a huge component to this. So there's a little bit of vagueness to my opinion. So unless things go sideways during free agency and they either don't land enough guys or things go sideways and they just completely, they trade for, guys we're not even talking about or sign guys we're not talking about. If they're going to build through the trenches, I would still expect them to land, the guy they want to tackle or a stud along the defensive line.
All right, I'm for it. Obviously, like we've talked about, free agency will dictate a lot of what they do. So, fortunately, we'll have our mock drafts that we've been doing the last, I don't want to say, I guess, the last 2 months, but a lot of it will be more clear and better to narrow down what they're going to be doing in the draft, depending on free agency. But
yeah, I did one just to see what I could do with some trades. So I forced a trade on Pro Football Focus to move back from 4 to 6 and add a third rounder, like what Callahan said. And then because I was engaged here, I wasn't really fully paying attention because I probably would have traded up from 68. But the first 4 picks I ended up with were Mason Graham at 6, Matthew Golden at 24, Wyatt Milam at 68, and then Kevin Winston, Penn State safety, at 69.
That's not too bad. Not too bad.
So, I mean, truth be told, if those are their first 3 picks, again, assuming that they address the offensive line, whether it's Ronnie Stanley or a guard, I'm higher on Wylam than other guys. I know people are kind of quieted on him a lot.
He's probably going to be a guard, but he is going to be a damn good at one.
So if they address, tackle, guard, whatever, if those are our first 4 picks, I don't know too many people that would have a legitimate gripe against those.
Now you're just really underestimating Patriots fans.
I didn't say people would. I just said people would. I didn't say they won't gripe. I just don't think it would be a legitimate gripe.
That's fair. Luis Gill with the Yankees out 6 weeks, minimum 6 weeks with a lat strain, high grade. Somebody comment underneath said it's more likely 8 to 12 weeks, so that's a big hit for the Yankees to start the year.
Lat strain, if it's his throwing shoulder, I'd say 3 months.
He won't throw for at least 6 weeks, so that means he's out for
So if he's not throwing for 6 weeks, which puts us in mid-April, he won't pitch till June.
Yeah,
Sox first place, AL East.
I'm not there yet.
You could give it a second state your take.
That could be.
All right.
Says the
all right. That'll do it. That'll do it, boys. Any final words?
No, I will. I'll be in sunny Florida Wednesday evening through next Wednesday at some point. And so I'll be texting from Florida with all the good news we get from the legal tampering period, aka actual free agency, which does start at noon Monday, March 10th, is when teams can officially contact players and their players agents for the first time, even because we all know that nobody calls player agents before then.
Yeah, no.
So final thoughts. Warm weather is upon us. The snow is melting.
Hallelujah.
Sunny, warm days are on the horizon.
Hallelujah.
Hell yeah. Can't wait. That will be in Brazil.
All right. That will do it for this week. I'm not sure when we'll be on next, if we'll do it before this. But Tuesday, March 18th, we do have Lucy Burge coming back on the podcast. We're going to be doing a Red Sox preview special. We'll be doing a lot of over-unders like we did last year. And as you know, Lucy works for BetMGM. So this is right down her alley. But we'll be back at the latest, March 18th, maybe sooner. We'll see. Until then, we'll raise the banner. Thanks for listening and stay frosty.
Stay frosty.